Here's a short video on comma rules number 2 and number 3, the adjective rule and list rule. Hey kids. All right. Anyway, comma rule number 2. Actually, open your composition book to your comma rules page that you have not only written in your table of contents, but you have then, wherever you wrote it, like in mine, it's on page 20. Nope, it's on page 21. And you have comma rule number 1. Now you're going to add comma rule number 2 and comma rule number 3. You just need to write this part and this part. Don't forget to put all the parts. If you leave anything out, you can leave the number out. I'm calling it rule number 2, rule number 3. You need to know it's the adjective rule or the list rule. And because it's in parentheses doesn't mean you skip it. It means you write it in parentheses. The serial comma rule. So teachers call it the list rule, but the world calls it the serial comma rule. So you need to have that. Add those to your notes. You may need to pause. If you want to put the examples, you can put the examples. But you don't have to if you don't need to. It's your notes. Make them so they make sense to you. Okay, the adjective rule. It's just simply when there's an adjective and a noun, you put a comma between the two adjectives. For example, she wore a long, comma, flowing gown. So, in order to use this rule, you need to know what an adjective is and you need to know what a noun is. And you absolutely should know that by now. Plus, also, we went over that recently. But if you think, oh, I have to memorize it or whatever, like, when am I going to use that? I'm never going to use it. As you learn more complicated English grammar, you're going to need to know that. Because if I say you need to use the adjective rule, or you're going to put a prepositional phrase at the front of a sentence before you put the comma, you need to know what those things are. And if you ever take a foreign language, they're going to be talking about the noun or the adjective or the verb or conjugating a verb. You need to know those. So if you do not know them yet, don't just go, meh. You need to go find out what they are and remember them and learn them. That's your responsibility to learn them. All I can do is kind of tell you about them. You have to remember them. So, you need to know what an adjective is. It is a describing word. It describes a noun, and a noun is a person, place, or thing. Remember that. So it's a pretty easy rule. So, now we're going to go to the worksheet. The worksheet has rule number 2 and rule number 3 because they're pretty simple. And 1 through 5 has to do with rule number 2. 6 through 10 is using rule number 3. So in rule number 1, when you see 2 adjectives next to a noun, you put a comma in the middle. So, an example, adjective, comma, adjective, noun. So here, your answer to that question was the most intelligent, brilliant answer I have ever received from a student. So you want to find 2 adjectives describing a noun. Intelligent, brilliant are both adjectives describing answer. It was an intelligent, comma, brilliant answer. So just the comma just has to separate the 2 adjectives. So when you're doing this worksheet before you turn it in, exaggerate your comma, put a nice big circle around it so I can easily glance down and see if you understand this rule. I had a queasy, uneasy stomach. Adjective, adjective, noun. Okay, continue with those and then turn it in and we'll see how you did. Now, going back to rule number 3, the list rule or serial comma. Use commas to separate items in a list or series. So you kind of need to know what a series is or what the word serial means. So a series is just a bunch of things in a row, right? So a series show has a bunch of episodes. A serial killer kills a bunch of people in a row. That's really morbid, but that's what it is. So this thing, comma, that thing, comma, and the other thing. So you do put a comma before the and. Here's the funky thing about English. Sometimes the rules change, and sometimes there's different rules. We are going by the MLA formatting rules. In Sherwood School District, that's what we use. So we do the comma before the and. It's also called the Oxford comma, but I'll show you why we do it and why it's important. Right now, you just need to know that that's how it works. So for example, she wore a gown, comma, a tiara, comma, and sparkly shoes. So you do put the comma there before the and. In some cases, you'll see it sometimes without the comma before the and. Let me show you why it is important. I'm going to skip that meme. So, for example, in an 8th grade promotion speech, this is using it without putting it before the and. This is how we use it when you put it before the and. These sentences have the exact same words. I couldn't have done this without the support of my parents, comma, Marianne Funderhyde and Jake Healy. Okay, that's using it without the comma before the and. What does that sound like? I couldn't have done this without the support of my parents, Marianne Funderhyde and Jake Healy. It almost sounds like Marianne and Jake are your parents, right? But if we put the comma before the and, like we do in Sherwood, and a lot of people do, the Oxford comma, I couldn't have done this without the support of my parents, comma, Marianne Funderhyde, comma, and Jake Healy. Very clear that you're thanking 4 people, your parents, or maybe more than that, but all your parents, Marianne Funderhyde and Jake Healy. There's no confusion, which is why we opt to do it the right way, if you will. So again, without the Oxford comma, sounds like I'm thanking 2 people, like they are my parents. With the Oxford comma, much more clear. That's why you do it. Okay, so let's go to the worksheet. Where we have the 5 sentences with the lists. Now, a list can be a noun, comma, noun, and noun. It could be a phrase, comma, phrase, comma, and phrase. So you have to really look at what is the list made up of. So in this case, Kyle purchased kitty litter, a hairdryer, and mayonnaise, like you do. So kitty litter, comma, a hairdryer, comma, and mayonnaise. That also makes that sentence more clear just to look at. You immediately put kitty litter together, a hairdryer together, and mayonnaise. And maybe you would anyway. But what I'm saying is, it looks better. We had turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, green beans, and pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving dinner. So you can see where this one would be like, hold on, what'd you have? But as soon as you put in the commas, turkey, comma, mashed potatoes, comma, stuffing, comma, green beans, comma, and pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving dinner, then it makes it a lot easier to just kind of glance at and read. Again, after you put your commas, big circles around them so I can check it carefully, finish these 3 sentences to let me know that you know how to do this. And then I want you to go into your SSR book. You want to find an example of a sentence using comma rule number 2, adjective, adjective, noun, and you want to find an example of comma rule number 3, the list rule, in your SSR book. If you can't find one in your SSR book, and you'll have to look a lot more. When we did comma rule number 1, every single book has an example of that that's in your reading level. Every single book. Easy to find. This one, it depends on what they're talking about and if they decided to use this or not. So if you can't find one in your current SSR book, look at another book for one, but you want to try to find an example of one in the real world. Here's another thing that gets tricky. The adjective rule, if it's adjective, adjective, noun, if it's in a really complex sentence, another funky thing with English and a thing with comma rules is the ultimate rule of commas is if there's multiple comma rules in one very complex sentence, then you don't use all of them. And so that's one that a lot of times will get dropped. And that's fine. If you find in your book adjective, adjective, noun, and it's a complex sentence and they didn't put the comma there, you can still use it as an example and put the comma there and just kind of use the part of the sentence as your example. And sometimes editors won't catch it also. So you might have a simple sentence that doesn't have it. Most of the time, though, you're going to see adjective, comma, adjective, noun, or however many adjectives there are. So look for those. Once you find them, go to the tests and quizzes page and add your sentences. So again, like we did with the other things, nope, that's not it. Once you write them down so that you're all ready to add them, you go to the tests and quizzes page, find the link that says give me your example, and if it says page not found, just try it again, because today we've been having that issue over and over and over. See, hold on, I clicked on it when it did work over here. Okay, here it is. Here's what it looks like. Oh. Here's what it looks like. Okay, here's what it looks like. So you'll have, you'll find your example of common rule number 2, the adjective rule. You write it here. Write the book and author. And make sure that you write it word for word as it is in the book. They should be well-written sentences because they're published and they're in your book. You don't want to mess up the sentence by not putting capitals or not putting periods. You want to write it exactly as it is and be like, look at this gem that I found in my book. Then, list number 3. If you look for a very long time in several books and you don't find one of them, just write, I couldn't find one. But you know, spend 30 minutes or so trying to find one of each. Hopefully you at least find one, and hopefully you find 2. I believe that most people found 2, and very few couldn't find any. Eventually you're going to write your own sentences, so you'll have something to submit. But for right now, I want you to try to find it in the real world. And if you're doing this outside of class, find it, if you find it in a pamphlet or on a calendar or anything that's written out in the real world and you find an example of these 2, that counts. It doesn't have to be from your book. So there you go. Good luck with that, and whatever. End of video.